Governor Saldo, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us despite your busy schedule. I want to start by asking for your assessment of the current situation in the Kherson region in terms of civilian safety. Every day, the Kherson region of the Russian Federation comes under shelling from the Ukrainian armed forces. Unfortunately, we often hear reports about civilian casualties. In your view, what needs to be done to protect the civilian population of Kherson, and what kind of measures would be most effective in the short term?
Well, first off, let's remember the goals of this special military operation: to fully protect civilians, not just in Kherson, but also in the neighboring regions where our compatriots live. We need to achieve the goals of the SMO. We're moving steadily towards victory, and once that is achieved, clearly the level of danger will drop significantly. That is the long-term outlook. As for the current situation, yes, SMO operations continue in the Kherson region. The line of contact stretches over 300 kilometers, from the Black Sea all the way to the Zaporozhye region. The enemy is positioned on the right bank of the Dnieper, which they occupy, and they are doing everything they can to disrupt the lives of civilians on our side of the river. That's what we're seeing: constant malicious attacks on civilian infrastructure, hospitals, kindergartens, schools, gas stations, markets. They're even striking civilian vehicles driving on the roads. They know exactly what they're doing. Any drone operator, whether he's using a quadcopter or a fixed-wing UAV, can easily tell a military target from a civilian one. Just last week, there was an outrageous incident. A van carrying agricultural workers to the fields was hit by an FPV drone. During a mission, when a drone's battery starts to run out and the operators haven't found any military targets, they simply direct it at civilians instead so that it doesn't go to waste. Because military targets are harder to locate, while civilians, on the other hand, are easy targets. So, in order to mitigate this threat, we're currently building up additional defenses, especially electronic warfare capabilities, to counter these drones. We're doing everything we can to secure critical infrastructure: transformer substations, water towers, water and gas pipelines, because the enemy doesn't hesitate to target those either. They want to damage basic civilian infrastructure and make life unbearable for the people. That said, I bow my head to the people of the Kherson region. They continue living, working, and tending to their land. The left bank part of the region is primarily agricultural, and of course, farming is the main livelihood for a lot of people there. That's why both the local authorities, working together with the military, and special units are doing everything they can to reduce the threat from these strikes perpetrated by these Ukrainian militants. Yes, the only word I can use to refer to them is militants, because what they're doing goes beyond the normal, beyond the reasonable. If you're a soldier, then fight other soldiers, not civilians.
You've brought up exactly the topic I wanted to cover next. Kherson's agricultural industry is one of the things your region is most famous for, and this tactic we're seeing, where it's considered expedient to hit a civilian vehicle with a drone rather than just waste it on a field. We've witnessed this firsthand, not just in Kherson, but in the Belgorod region, in Kursk, and frankly across the board. I mention Belgorod in particular because it also has a large agricultural sector. You're driving down the highway with the military and they tell you, better speed up here. Then you look to the right. There's a tractor in the field, just going about its business. So how badly is Kherson's agricultural sector suffering from these kinds of strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces? And what support is being provided to local farms, especially when it comes to safety?
Just the other day, I spoke with representatives of several major farms. Most of them are located closer to the Dnieper. That's where the richest, most fertile land is. Traditionally, agriculture has been a well-developed and highly productive industry in the Kherson region. Even now, despite the serious blow dealt by the destruction of the Kakhovsky Dam, which put the entire irrigation system out of commission, agriculture remains a leading sector in our regional economy. Just in the past 2 months alone, our farmers have lost several units of agricultural equipment. The Ukrainian forces are deliberately targeting tractors and harvesters while they are working out in the fields. They scatter landmines too, and sometimes vehicles hit them, causing severe damage. It's all being done with one goal: to disrupt peaceful life, to shake people's confidence in the Russian authorities who are helping them. That is the only real objective behind this. Militarily, this achieves nothing for them, but they do it anyway. So, to help people deal with these situations, we've put in place reserves of construction materials to repair and rebuild damaged homes. When needed, we help with equipment too. Ross Agro Leasing, Russia's largest agro-industrial leasing company, has been actively involved in the region too. Volunteers are pitching in. The United Russia Party is carrying out lots of initiatives here, providing humanitarian aid. The entire country stepped up and is now standing with the Kherson region and supporting our people through these difficult times.
Ultimately, perhaps the most reliable and effective way to protect civilians, whether we're talking about Donbass or Zaporozhye or Kherson or even Kursk, is to push back the front line. Right now, we're seeing solid progress in the Donetsk region. Our reconnaissance and sabotage units are already active near Pokrovsk, and the city is in a semi-encirclement at the moment. But the Donetsk, Lugansk, even the Sumy region lack the same obstacle to the advance that we have here, namely the Dnieper. So, in that context, how realistic is the scenario of pushing the front line back in a meaningful way? I say meaningful because, as you know, even with fiber optics, FPV drones can operate as far as 30 to 40 kilometers behind the line of contact these days. How favorable is the situation along the line of contact? Does it allow us to push forward and build on the momentum gained so far?
We fully understand that the Kiev regime is doing everything it can to hold on to power, and in order to make that grip on power believable, they are desperately trying to retain control over the territories they still occupy, which, let's be clear, are already part of the Russian Federation. The parts of Kherson and Zaporozhye on the right bank of the river are Russian lands, but they are occupied by the enemy. The people there voted to rejoin the greater Russian family, but the enemy still doesn't let them live in peace. So our top priority in the special military operation is, of course, to liberate those people and return the territories that held referendums back to Russia. That is our #1 goal. And if the Kiev regime refuses to come to the negotiating table and accept the principles laid out by our leadership, such as denazification and demilitarization, then this may not stop with just Kherson or Zaporozhye. For people to live peacefully, without this constant threat from the sky, this new type of warfare we're seeing, we must eventually cross to the right bank of the Dnieper and liberate the entire territory of the Kherson region. Now, as you rightly noted, the Dnieper is a serious obstacle. Crossing it would take a lot of resources. Well, actually, we can cross it, and we do, for tactical military purposes. But holding that ground, pushing forward from there, that would take a lot of manpower, training, and strategy. It is up to our general staff to plan and carry out those operations, and I think we should let them do their jobs. As for us, we'd better take care of things within our reach. So yes, the Dnieper is a tough obstacle. Still, nothing is impossible. It has been done before. During the Great Patriotic War, 2 divisions helped to liberate Kherson. One of them was an airborne division led by the legendary Vasily Margelov, known to all paratroopers as Batya, or father. So the experience is there, and I'm sure our military is studying that history closely. The right bank also has higher elevation. It gives the enemy an advantage in terms of terrain. That's why they're digging in and reinforcing their positions. Why are they doing that? Because they know that eventually they will have to retreat. No matter how strong their fortifications, our forces will complete their mission. The enemy doesn't have that many forces left on the right bank. More and more people in Kherson and other towns along the river are noticing the presence of foreigners. They hear people speaking in foreign languages. That means Ukraine doesn't have enough of its own men left. Everyone sees how Zelensky's regime is rounding people up off the streets, like dogs, to send them to the front. So now they have taken another approach. They get a lot of money from abroad, and they simply buy up mercenaries from all over the globe. People who don't care where they fight and where they die. But no matter what, the goals of the special military operation will be achieved. And those mercenaries who have come to our land, and this is our land, have made a very grave mistake.
As we talk about threats coming from above, we shouldn't forget there's also a ground threat. As far as I know, the Ukrainian forces didn't learn much from their failed operation at Krinky. They keep trying to carry out these raids across the Dnieper onto our side. But based on the information I have, they're no better off now than they were back then. In fact, they're worse off. So speaking more broadly about all these attempts by Ukrainian militants to disrupt the lives of ordinary people in the Kherson region, we've already discussed the agricultural sector, but it's not just tractors and farms being hit. As you mentioned earlier, civilian vehicles and people's homes are being targeted too. What's the scale of efforts right now to rebuild the region? Let's start with the left bank for now, since it is under our control. But maybe the Ukrainian-occupied right bank as well, since we know we'll have to rebuild there one day too.
You mentioned the small odds of success for the Ukrainian militants trying to push into the left bank. Well, their odds are high, all right. High odds of ending up 6 feet under. It's them who should be thinking hard about what to do. Now, as to your question about what's being done to ensure normal life continues in a region where active warfare is still ongoing, the Russian government has launched a targeted program for the socio-economic development of Russia's new regions. This program allocates substantial resources for rebuilding infrastructure, especially roads. The goal is to bring the entire road network up to the national average by the year 2030, as laid out by the president. And despite ongoing hostilities, this work is moving forward. Roads are being repaired and improved. The education system is being rebuilt. Large investments are going into the renovation of schools, kindergartens, and other educational institutions. Significant funding is also being directed towards the healthcare system. Of course, there is a challenge with staffing, but we're seeing specialists come in from other regions of Russia. They come and work here, even though it's dangerous, because we are one people, one family. Russian people have a unique trait. They come to help you even when it's risky or dangerous for them. So work continues. There is also strong social support in place. Almost all pensioners in the region have now been integrated into the Russian pension system, both insurance-based and state pensions. On average, that is about 20,000 rubles a month, and people are receiving those payments. Financial support systems are in place and fully operational. The banking system is developing across the entire region. And the key parts of peaceful life, of getting that peaceful life back, are all there. And people do notice it. In fact, many of those who stayed are now telling their relatives who left, "Come back. It's always better at home." Everything is being done to ensure that, even with the special military operation underway and with martial law in place, people can live their lives, have access to services, and not feel cut off from the modern standards of living found in the rest of Russia.
Earlier, you mentioned the situation with the Kakhovka Reservoir. It has been 2 years this summer since the Ukrainian armed forces destroyed it. So after all this time, what consequences is the Kherson region still facing as a result of the dam's destruction and what was essentially an act of terrorism by the Ukrainian army?
The consequences are as follows. When everything is functioning well, life adapts accordingly, and both nature and technology adjust to better conditions, and this case is no exception. The Kakhovka Dam created the largest reservoir on the Dnieper River that has a cascade of hydroelectric power stations built on it. That reservoir provided water for an extensive irrigation system that was developed to make the Crimean steppes fertile, because these are highly productive lands that only lacked water due to a predominantly arid climate. The construction of the dam was complemented by the development of over 10,000 kilometers of artificial waterways, and I'm not even counting all the smaller canals that distribute water further, bringing it to the Kherson region, northern Crimea, and Zaporozhye. And this is the reason why, agriculturally, these lands were used to grow crops that normally require a lot of water. And regardless of any droughts throughout the years, the region had been able to yield excellent crops.
Thanks to irrigation, right?
That's right. This used to be the second largest irrigation system in the world, second only to the one in America, built on the Mississippi River. It was created by the best Soviet engineers and built by the Soviet working class as part of the Soviet Union's massive economic development project. After the dam's destruction, agriculture started to decline because of the lack of water. The past 2 summers have been very dry, with droughts, and farmers have suffered significant losses. If the irrigation system were still functioning, they wouldn't have. But as it stands now, they have, and of course, the government has been trying to compensate these losses and cover some of the farmers' expenses, but it's not enough. Additionally, the aquifers that used to provide drinking and household water for all settlements on the Dnieper's east bank have been drying up. With the Kakhovka Dam gone, the groundwater levels have dropped, and there's now a shortage of water. So now we have this paradox. Settlements are located along the Dnieper, and its natural riverbed still exists, as the Dnieper is a mighty river, and yet they experience a shortage of water. As a result, we're facing similar problems to those in Donetsk and the Donetsk Republic, though on a smaller scale, of course. To supply the local population with water, we have organized water deliveries using trucks. Thanks to support from Deputy Prime Minister Manturov, we have received significant assistance. We have been provided with water trucks, and now we are fully equipped to address the water supply issues. But you know, we solve one problem and we move on to others.
I understand. And so, the fact is that Kherson region, which could have come to the aid of Donetsk region, cannot do so because it has also been affected by this essentially water terrorism by the Ukrainian armed forces, because the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal
is also not functioning.
They've controlled it from Slavyansk since when? Since 2014 or 2015. And that's the root of all the problems we're seeing in Donetsk. But aside from the situation in Kherson region, I also wanted to discuss with you the recent developments in Kiev, since, as far as I know, you've also worked there. And in particular, the latest scandal involving Zelensky and his controversial moves, when he tried to restrict the work of the so-called Independent National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and make it subordinate to the Prosecutor General's office, which is headed by the guy who failed an integrity check back in 2023 and because of that didn't get to lead the NABU. But he was appointed as Prosecutor General, and now he almost gained control over the NABU. All of this blew up in Zelensky's face because Europe was outraged, the US was outraged. They said, "What's going on?" And Zelensky very quickly reversed his decision, and the parliament promptly canceled everything. By the way, this alone speaks volumes about how independent Ukraine's parliament really is. They can backtrack on their own decisions in a matter of a few days, or like a week. And so, what do you make of Zelensky's recent actions in this regard, and the protests that broke out when people took to the streets in Kiev, and now in Lvov? Though we'll discuss that separately, as it's for a slightly different reason. What's your take on this scandal? Whose fingerprints are on it, so to speak, and how could this all play out for Kiev, in your opinion?
You're right to ask whose fingerprints are on this, because it's obvious. Zelensky's MO is, SAS is the key to success. Both NABU and SAPO were created on the West's orders. They did not exist before, not while I was working in Ukraine. They were established around 2015 or 2016, first NABU, then SAPO. But the question is, why? There was already a prosecutor's office, so why create a separate one? To keep the Kiev regime in check. Back then, it was Poroshenko who was also trying to pull strings when he appointed Lutsenko, a guy with no legal education, as prosecutor general. He had the law changed, and even the constitution amended, swiftly and without any protests on the lawmakers' part. Now, Zelensky, forgive the comparison, like Hitler, who brought so much suffering to the world, he has been allowed to do whatever he pleased, scot-free, these past 6 years. No one seemed to care. In Hitler's case, no one noticed. But when these supposedly democratic agencies installed to uphold Western values started threatening Zelensky's inner circle, and when doubts started to grow in the West about whether Zelensky is still their man, he decided to push it and see if he can still get away with it. He gutted NABU and SAPO. And it was easy, as he still has his rubber stamp parliament. The servant of the People Party pushed it through. Even the so-called opposition, like Yulia Tymoshenko, who claimed she wouldn't support this, folded and obeyed. Zelensky thought he would get away with it, just like he did after insulting the US president in the Oval Office. But this time, the West noticed. To maintain the illusion of democracy, they orchestrated street protests in Ukraine. They used the same old Maidan playbook.
They even used the same chants. He who doesn't jump is a Muscovite, straight out of 2014.
Exactly. It was the same old script. The orchestrated protests, students joined in. They always love a good protest, but it was no real mass movement. The message was not for Zelensky. It was for Ukrainians. See, you have democracy. You can fight back. Except they weren't fighting for Ukraine's interests or Zelensky's. The protests were entirely for the benefit of Ukraine's Western handlers.
I'd really love to discuss in more detail what you briefly mentioned about the NABU and its investigations into Zelensky's inner circle. I've been following this topic closely and looked at the NABU's track record over the 10 years of its existence. And frankly, it's unimpressive. More than that, the NABU's own investigators have been involved in corruption scandals, like the cryptocurrency case that was investigated and exposed by Ukrainian journalists. And there have been polls that effectively showed that 70% of Ukrainians agree that corruption has gotten worse since the NABU's creation, because people do feel it everywhere when they have to grease palms to get anything done. And so this Western-made puppet institution, the NABU, spent a whole decade doing nothing much really except putting up a front, and then suddenly, in 2025, it started working, and working effectively. It started knocking on some very specific doors, targeting people very close to Zelensky. The sheer timing fascinates me. Why now? Did NABU finally remember its purpose? Or is this a coordinated move by the EU and US to discredit Zelensky? What's your take?
You know, what I'm about to say isn't definitive, but it's close to the truth.
Of course, it's your opinion.
From the very beginning, both NABU and SAPO had been on the Western payroll through grants. The staff they hired were, of course, professionals with law degrees. Some came from the Prosecutor General's office, some from the Interior Ministry, and then they were retrained for new purposes in special education centers, and they were paid 3 to 5 times more than their peers doing the same kind of work elsewhere, like in the non-specialized prosecutor's office. So right away, this was an agency with enormous privileges that put it above everyone else in Ukraine. They started building their network in Kiev and then expanded all over the country, supposedly doing the same work as the law enforcement, but with more powers and less accountability. I would like to emphasize that. Throughout their existence, they had one mission given to them by those who paid them. They barely receive any funding from Ukraine's budget, although even if they did, 60% of that budget comes from the West's accounts, which also come with strings attached, naturally. And so what they did is they gathered compromising material, dirty laundry, on every official, every government employee working anywhere over these years. Why do you think Ukrainian MPs are all suddenly trembling and making excuses, saying things like, "We didn't know what we were voting for"? It's true they didn't know. They were just told how to vote, so they did. This time, when they voted to restore NABU's powers, did they also not know? Even if they didn't, they were told how to vote. Yet now they're trying to justify their own actions. Of course it was.
The vote was unanimous.
Oh, some conveniently stepped out during the vote.
A few abstained.
I have been there before. I know how it works. They had to use the bathroom or stepped out to grab a coffee, missed the vote. You get the idea. But look at them now, all trying to explain themselves publicly, like faction leader Arhamia, a true Ukrainian who is ethnically Georgian from Nikolaev. They even staged some photos with the protesters, posing as if they were with the people. But while the people are in the streets, the MPs are not. It is pure hypocrisy, completely detached from reality and the actual expectations of ordinary Ukrainians, as opposed to the paid activists bussed in for protests. This situation proves what the Western media will not say, that there is no Ukrainian leadership running the country. Ukraine is governed by its Western handlers. And this whole affair has confirmed it 100%. That is the truth.
So all these investigations, they've gathered compromising materials, and now they know exactly where they'll find dirt and what kind of dirt it is. Does this mean, in your view, that they're actively trying to undermine Zelensky and his team?
His position is shaking. Of course it's shaking. They've shown him that if he fails to obey, if he doesn't change his stance, the moment they snap their fingers, he'll be replaced. They've even started giving hints that they might back Zelensky. That is the democratic way of meddling with other nations' elections for you.
He even did a photo op for Vogue. So bizarre.
Remember the West's hysteria about Russia interfering in the US elections, allegedly hacking some high-tech voting system that Russian people have no understanding of? And what about now? They're not even hiding it. They openly say that Zelensky deserves to lead Ukraine, or Zelensky, whom they support despite the very fact that his term has expired. That is the hypocrisy of the big brother for you. I mean Uncle Sam, who's pulling all the strings.
You mentioned that Ukrainian MPs might not have even seen the documents they voted for or against. And this isn't the first time it's happened. They claimed the same thing when it came to the US deal on minerals. What's your take on that deal? How does it benefit Kiev, if at all? Or does it only make Kiev even more dependent on Uncle Sam, especially now that the Russian forces have liberated Shevchenko and its lithium deposits?
Rare earth metals.
Yes, rare earth metals. It's the largest deposit in this part of Europe. Logistically, wouldn't Europe prefer sourcing them from Donetsk rather than having them shipped from as far as South America? So in the end, what did the US gain from this deal? What did Ukraine give up? Or what did it get?
The US got what it always wants, the illusion of controlling global processes. This deal was pure theater, a media circus that made a big show of painting the US president as a peacemaker who's ready to swoop in and take a lot of Ukraine's natural resources for free for the sake of peace. Except those resources barely exist. Have you heard much about this deal lately?
I think the major ones are around Dnepropetrovsk, right?
Yes, in the Dnepropetrovsk region, and in the Krivoy Rog Basin and the Kirovograd region. They have some rare earth minerals processing plants in Kirovograd, but the production there is not big enough to interest a superpower like the US. This was all about controlling the narrative. Today, information is power. If you have that power, the rest follows. Information attracts people's attention. That is why the deal has already been forgotten. It has served its purpose. And frankly speaking, the US, and Russia as well, would benefit more from normal business relations. And you see talks are already shifting that way, with predictable and reliable partners, with the kind of partners you can work with on clear terms in any area, including our planet's resources. Although, truth be told, this topic alone deserves a separate conversation.
I agree completely. But then why did Zelensky fight so hard over it that he almost fell out with the US?
It was an act, pure theater. He tried to sell it as something significant, probably before Trump even grasped what was going on. You know, wrapping empty words in shiny paper.
Indeed, I see.
Let's face it, he's an actor.
True.
And he's got a talent for making people believe that he is what he's not. Sadly, that talent now serves darker purposes. And that's what we've seen, that talent in action. No matter what happens, he still gets red carpet treatment in European capitals. He tried the same in America, but got schooled on how things really work there.
Over there, the red carpet is not for him. And to wrap up, you briefly touched on how the focus in negotiations has been shifting toward normalization when it comes to partnerships and doing business. In the context of the Istanbul negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, with the US heavily involved on Kiev's side?
Through their special envoys,
right? The envoys? So how do you assess the current progress made by Medinsky and Umarov's teams? Could it lead, if not to a peace deal, then at least to normalization of relations, especially when it comes to business and trade?
The fact that the talks have started already signifies progress. To cross a bridge, you first need to come to it, then to step onto it. We have come to the bridge. That is already an achievement. That said, the negotiating process is hard. The parties have totally opposite demands. That is a known fact. But diplomacy is still better than war, at least when it comes to people's interests.
It saves people's lives, right?
Exactly. So when the US president says he wants fewer deaths and destroyed cities, I guess it sounds good. But his blindness to what the Ukrainian army does on Russian territory, where Russian people die, is baffling. People in Russia are dying too. We've been talking about this. I believe that the talks must continue, but the only way progress can be made and success achieved is on the terms that the Russian president and Supreme Commander-in-Chief has outlined repeatedly. That is the only way forward. Without those, there will be no deal, and then these goals will be achieved by other means as opposed to negotiations. But negotiations are still preferable.
Of course, Russia's objectives in the special military operation haven't changed. The president has been consistent about that, and he spoke about them on many occasions.
And if the US truly wants fewer casualties, or no more casualties, that is easily achieved once Ukraine withdraws its troops from the occupied territories.
Including Kherson.
Yes, including Kherson, and stops shelling cities full of civilians.
Governor, thank you again for your time. This was a most interesting conversation.
Thank you.